Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me here on this Thursday, December 24th edition of ATS Radio. I'm your host, Adam Burke. I'll be joined today by professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com. We're going to talk about the college football bowl games through next Wednesday, and we're also going to talk some NFL Week 16 on today's program. Great sportsbook promotions being offered all across the industry, and you can read about those over at ATS.io. While you're there, check out the sportsbook reviews, check out the exclusive sign-up bonuses that we're able to offer as an affiliate of those legal U.S. sportsbooks. And of course, scan through. Check out all of our free picks, predictions, bowl game picks, NFL Week 16 thoughts, college basketball. That's taking an off day today, but it'll be back tomorrow. College football obviously going on, and the NBA back as well. Starting on Tuesday night, a lot of games Wednesday, off day today, but the 5 Christmas Day games coming up tomorrow. Plenty of things going on in the sports world. You can read about all of it over at the website. And make sure you download the ATS app as well. Full article integration from ATS.io to go along with a bet tracker and odds screen. You can buy premium model selections from there, $9.99 a week, $19.99 a month for the picks from that analytics model. You can listen to the shows through the ATS app, through the article recap over at the website. Really great tool to have in the palm of your hand. We highly recommend that you download the ATS app from the Google Play Store or from the Apple Store. And if you are searching, search against the spread. It'll make it a lot easier for you to find that app. With that, we bring on professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com. And Brad, how's it going today, man?
It's going well. How you doing?
Doing well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always here, sir. And you and I were talking about this before we started recording here, that so far in the bowl season, I mean, it's been a blowout in pretty much every game, double-digit wins for every team that's been a winner. Not a whole lot of competitive bowl games so far.
No, there hasn't. And I'm not sure a lot of it's going to change here. I mean, if you're looking at some of these point spreads, and I mean, there probably is going to be some clear disparities of motivation. And when you get that, I don't even care if you're an underdog or a favorite. Obviously, it's going to be quite evident who's there ready to play and who isn't. So I think we kind of talked about this last week, but probably some opportunity for some in-game, especially if you're late to the party, because, I mean, there's been a lot of steam on a lot of things as far as if you followed the money so far, you've been having a pretty good bowl game because most of the teams have been correct here. So if you don't want to play into it and you're a little late to the party, obviously with there being blowouts, it doesn't matter if you're late to the party. It doesn't matter what number you get for the most part. You've been okay if you've been following it.
Well, and it's been all chalk here so far, too. So we'll see if that winds up continuing, even though, for this December 24th bowl game that we're not going to talk about, it's been one-sided Hawaii money on the underdog, with Houston having anywhere from 15 to 20 players not in the lineup here, whether it's academics, whether it's COVID, whether it's injuries, whether it's opt-outs. And that's something you lamented to me at the top of the show here, is that, generally speaking, we've got a lot of time to sort of organize our thought processes for these bowl games, a lot of time for news to kind of come out. We can react to it, this and that. But you mentioned this to me that, in terms of getting market entry for these bowl games, the way that news has been breaking and the way that these lines have been moving, it's been tough to get decent numbers on these games.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's not obviously it's the 24/7 news cycle, but it's getting the proper position. I don't get a lot of info that pre-flop. I get some, it trickles in. I mean, for example, yesterday, Shai Werts was basically everything that I read a few days prior to the bowl game. It was more like he was questionable at best. And yet, you get to the game. Obviously, Georgia Southern's taking some money there. He not only plays, but he looks 100%. I mean, I can't even believe that he was questionable heading into the game the way he played. So, I'm lamenting some of the info that's not getting released out there. I mean, some of it is, but a lot of it, you got to really do some digging. And, like with Houston today, I mean, okay, 15, 20 guys are out. Which guys? Because I'll tell you this, I mean, it all sounds fine and dandy. Well, you automatically bet Hawaii. I've seen teams with, playing with 50 some guys on their entire roster and have a good solid performance. So it depends on who's out. I mean, that's one thing that COVID's taught me. not to overreact sometimes to 15, 20 guys being out, because a lot of times it still doesn't impact necessarily the game. So I'm anxious to see how low this line gets as far as today's game goes.
Well, and another thing about it too, and we'll move on from this game here in a second, but for Houston, a lot of guys not in the lineup, and you question motivation, for a team like that, where they kind of go into the game thinking, okay, well, we're missing 20 guys, probably some of our better players. What does it matter? But then on the other side, the guys replacing those guys have everything to play for. Whether they're seniors who don't play and this is their last game, whether it's underclassmen that are, going to go out there and be eager to, impress the coaching staff, try to get themselves more playing time for next season. That's the thing. And that's why, we talked a lot about this on yesterday's show with Kyle Hunter, that look, from a pre-flop standpoint, a pregame standpoint, I don't know how many of these bowl games I actually want to play. But from a live betting standpoint, we're seeing pretty early on that the team that wants to be there, the team that looks prepared, they've taken care of business. And maybe it doesn't continue that way, but at least you can see something with your eyes that will say, okay, here's what I'm seeing in the first quarter of this game. I think this is going to continue, or I don't think this is going to continue. I think live betting is 110% the way to attack, especially this bowl season, but I think in future bowl seasons with these early games, where some teams may be happy to be there and some aren't.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. So I mean, as we're taping this, I think it'll be apparent, if Houston, I'll tell you, if they're ready to play, they're going to cover this number, because I don't care if 15, 20 guys are out, unless it's a bunch of starters and whatnot. I don't think that would be the case. Otherwise, the number would really plummet. But they're better in Hawaii. So if they show up, they're going to win and cover this number. But if they don't, then I could see them getting beat. Not only forget covering the spread, they'll probably lose the game outright and could lose badly. So I think the live, pretty much anything you've seen in the first quarter. And I'm trying to think, pretty much every bowl game, what you saw in the first quarter, that team that dominated the first quarter basically won and covered the game. So, it's only 5 games. It's small data sample size, but it's the only sample size we got so far for the 2021 bowl season. So, that's how I'm attacking it until I see different.
Well, and of course, too, one other thing that's been kind of a consideration, and, I've written a few previews. I still do writing over at bangthebook.com, even though now the show through ATS.io. You've got some teams that have had some either extended layoffs, haven't played in basically a month, like a Liberty Coastal Carolina in a game we'll talk about in a few minutes. Liberty hasn't played in about a month. And you have some other teams that maybe played a game like Houston, but hadn't played the previous 3 or 4 weeks. So that's another thing too, where, we're used to these long, 18, 20, maybe 22-day layoffs between the end of the regular season and a bowl game. But those teams also have 12 or 13 data points from the regular season. We don't have that at all this year. So that's also been a more difficult wrinkle. And again, speaks to why I think there's a lot more equity and also line equity in live betting.
Absolutely. Another thing we don't have, and you kind of brought up another thing that I just remembered, we don't have any non-conference hardly matchups to distinguish teams. That's one of my staples of handicapping, is comparing strength of schedules. Well, obviously some conferences are stronger than others. So a lot of times I defer to, hey, how'd you do? How'd not only your team, but how'd your conference do in the non-conference play? We don't have any of those data points to compare to this bowl season. So that's been kind of why I've been a little slow out of the gates, and as far as firing a bunch of plays. I kind of wanted to see how that played out. If specific conferences were underperforming or overperforming, because I don't know in a lot of instances, especially with the group of 5, how strong some of these group of 5 conferences are.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point too, simply to say that, it's bowl season. I get it. There are standalone games, this and that, but no matter how much you handicap a game, you're still gambling on that game. You try to limit the degree to which it's a gamble for you, but it's still a gamble. You're still hoping that everything works out the way you expect it to. And of course, with the bowl season, you handicap motivation before the game, and sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. And when you're wrong, it winds up being very ugly.
Yeah.
But this year, with even more uncertainty, even more moving parts in all these games, it doesn't mean you have to increase your degree of gambling. If you don't like something pre-flop, don't bet it. Don't just have action on the game. simply because it exists, simply because it's there, simply because a lot of people are probably home for the holidays this year where they're going to watch, the New Mexico Bowl. They're going to watch the Camellia Bowl because there ain't shit else to do. Doesn't mean you have to take a pre-flop position on it. Watch the game live, bet it when you have more information and can decrease the degree of your gamble on that individual game. So I think it's true of all bowl seasons, but especially this one. And we'll see if that comes to fruition here on Friday with that Camellia Bowl that I mentioned already. Marshall and Buffalo. This one got as high as 5.5 in the marketplace yesterday. Now we're seeing some Marshall buyback down to 4.5 or 5 reduced juice kind of across the board. Total 54 for this one. Brad, what do you make of kind of the yo-yo action of this betting line?
Originally I took a Marshall position. That's just dead wrong. So I got a bad bet there on Marshall. And I was betting, I think Conference USA and Marshall specifically had played a tougher schedule than Buffalo. And I was betting past history as far as Doc Holliday being one of the best bowl coaches out there. So that's why I originally took Marshall. But more information comes in, and, Marshall obviously hasn't looked good the last couple of games after a 7-0 start. And, you get an overall vibe on the team. What is it? Well, how about this? Leading rusher, Brendan Knox, first team All-Conference USA, opts out. The leader on the offensive line, tackle Josh Ball, first team All-Conference USA, opts out. The Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year, Tavante Beckett, a linebacker for Marshall, opts out. So, I don't think Marshall's, I'll read the tea leaves and it sounds real, basic, but I mean, they're not going to play. Looks like Jared Patterson for Buffalo, the outstanding running back is. I mean, I got a bad bet on Marshall. I could only look towards Buffalo at this point.
Well, and something I said on yesterday's show was that, I do think both of these teams will be motivated with how they finished up the regular season. Buffalo losing, of course, in the conference championship game. Marshall doing the same not too long after they played really bad against Rice. So you would expect both of these teams to show up, be engaged, be motivated, want to erase those bad performances. Then key players opt out for Marshall, and you sit there and you ask yourself, how serious is the Thundering Herd taking this game? Will the team follow the lead of those guys that opted out and maybe not fully be there either physically or mentally? With Buffalo, their leader, Jared Patterson, seems to be playing this game. So is that, does that speak more to Buffalo's mindset going into the bowl game? I think it's a reasonable argument to consider. Again, maybe you wait and see how the first quarter goes, but based on, as you said, reading the tea leaves, kind of looking at the context of this game and sort of my initial handicapping position of both teams should want to be here, that's kind of changed a little bit to the point where, I have an overlay on Buffalo anyway from a power rating standpoint, but at 4.5 now with more information to process, I think the Bulls are the play.
Yeah, that's the only way I could go here. I don't have that much of a power ratings overlay. It's pretty much close to the number at this point, even factoring in those guys being out for Marshall. I do also lean under. I mean, if you really want to go crazy and bet, a ham sandwich on the total, obviously that's not going crazy unless it's honey baked ham. I think it's the best D Buffalo's faced this year. I mean, their schedule's been pathetic. And I'm not sure how effective Marshall's going to be on offense. I mean, their quarterback, Wells, is really struggling. And now he doesn't have his best weapon, his running back, to hand the ball off to. So I do lean under.
All right, so we moved to Saturday here, and a game we were supposed to get during the regular season that now we get as a bowl game, game 283, 284. This is the Cure Bowl in Orlando, Florida, between Liberty and Coastal Carolina. 7 with extra juice or a cheap 7.5 at even money or plus money is the line here on Coastal. 59.5 the total for this one. And as I said already, Brad, Liberty, I mean, they haven't played since November 27th, and they played UMass. So it's kind of like playing a glorified scrimmage, basically. Coastal, if Coastal was in a situation where they had played Louisiana last week, win or lose, I'd probably fade them here. But now I'm not eager to really back either side in this game.
I like Liberty. I did take a side. I am obviously worried about the layoff a little bit, but here's what I'm going to bank on: their bowl experience. They played in this exact bowl game last year, so obviously a lot of those players experienced that. Meanwhile, Coastal Carolina has never in the history of the program ever made a bowl appearance. Yeah, they'll be excited, but and I know there's not a lot of hoopla surrounding the bowl games like there usually is, but still, we'll see how they handle the expectations. I also look. I like Jamie Chadwell. He's the head coach of Coastal a lot, but I think Hugh Freeze is elite. And by elite, I think he's a top 10 coach in the country. He's already cut his teeth in the SEC. I don't care if he cheated or whatnot. When you beat Nick Saban back-to-back years and almost do it 3 times in a row, they almost did that. You're pretty freaking good. I don't care who you got as far as players go. He's really good, Hugh Freeze, as a bowl coach. He's 4-1 straight up and against the spread. I wanted to bet Liberty in the first matchup. And I remember specifically that line was right around 7.5. And I wanted to bet Liberty at Coastal Carolina in that matchup. And then it got driven up to 10 when things were leaking that Liberty might be, down quite a few players as far as COVID. But the fact, if I wanted to bet Liberty plus 7.5 at Coastal, why not bet them at a neutral site when they've been there, done that at this exact same bowl game? So that's my thought process.
Well, and something I think will be worth kind of following a little bit here is, Coastal had to cancel last week because it was their COVID issues. It wasn't the COVID issues with Louisiana. It was theirs. So with that in mind, who's going to play in this game? I mean, will everybody be available? Is there information out there that we don't know yet? And this line did move in Coastal's favor, here in the early betting process, but what do we find out in advance of the game? Will all of their key guys be available? That's a big question that we don't really know. So this is one where I feel like for right now, if you want to bet the game, you've got to take Liberty, because we could find out something about Coastal on Friday or Saturday that we don't want to find out. You could be holding 7 with juice or 7.5 when this line may go back to, the 5.5 it opened around.
Yeah, I mean, that's my expectation. But I'll say this, I was a little worried yesterday. I mean, it came off a key number of 7 at most shops yesterday as I was, getting ready to send out my weekly newsletter. And I was already looking to take a Liberty position. I mean, I wrote it up with Liberty plus 7 and then 7.5 start popping. I mean, that concerned me a little bit. So that, Liberty went from being, one of my top plays easily of the week of the first 10, 12 bowl games to, I still like it. I still bet it. But it's not, top play material because, I mean, if you follow the money so far, you've been pretty good. So that does concern me a little bit. I got to throw that out there.
285, 286 here between Louisiana and UTSA. This is the first responder bowl in Dallas, Texas. Louisiana probably happy to not be playing the bowl game in New Orleans, which is where they seem to wind up going pretty much every time they go to a bowl game. But they are laying a big number here, Brad, 14 as a road favorite. You can find 13.5s out there if you try. You may have to lay minus 15 on that. Total in the 56 range for this one. As when you look at the game flow, you look at the expectation here, looks like we're going to see a ton of running plays from both of these teams, but you wonder if the defenses can actually stop the run.
Yeah, I like the under. I bet it when Circa opened them up as far as this one, and I'd still lean the under. Just UTSA has been off for a while. So we'll see what they have as far as the rhythm offensively. You mentioned both teams like to lean on the run. So I mean, clock moving. I mean, even if they don't stop it, that's okay as long as they can somewhat stop it, where it's not ripping off touchdowns. I'm okay with first downs and the clock moving. I'll say this: I'm also leaning with UTSA, even though my power ratings say maybe even a slight lean to Louisiana. You look at when UTSA had to step up and play some good competition. I'm talking BYU, UAB, Army. They all had difficulties getting margin on UTSA. All 3 of those games, UTSA lost by 12 points or less. Notably speaking, how did they keep it close? They, controlled the clock a little bit, ran the football, and all 3 of those games were under the total. So I think there's some correlation here, dog and under.
Yeah, and this is one, I thought it was really interesting watching UTSA's first game against Texas State, which was, quite an interesting game to say the least. But I thought what was kind of fascinating was that with Jeff Traylor, UTSA ran a bunch of tempo in that game.
Yeah.
And you sort of wonder, playing the 3 unders in the games where they did kind of step up in class a little bit, did they relax that tempo to a degree? Because they knew, look, if we try to play a track meet, against a better team, it's probably going to be challenging for us. So you sort of wonder here if UTSA does maybe play a little bit slower, does maybe want to keep this game a little bit closer. And again, maybe that first game was kind of, a little bit misleading because they did wind up going 8-3 to the under during the regular season. Yep. And everybody kind of saw them picking up the tempo and all that against Texas State. So I think this one's pretty fascinating. And I also think too that, like you, I've got a little bit of a power ratings overlay in this game. I've got Louisiana more like 18 in this spot.
Oh, wow.
But I'm not interested in playing Louisiana here because I don't know what they're going to look like in this game. Their bowl game was last week against Coastal. They wanted to play probably in a bigger bowl against a better opponent, something like that. Now they get UTSA. And nothing against the Roadrunners, but simply for Louisiana, they probably feel a little bit slighted to wind up being in this spot. They wanted that bowl game last week. So it is very hard for me to lay 2 touchdowns with a team that I don't know how much they're going to want to be there. And that's even with a very good head coach in Billy Napier.
Totally agree. And, they laid a big number in a bowl game last year and didn't cover against Miami, Miami of Ohio. So we at least have how do they react in that regard last year as a big bowl favorite. I agree with you. The whole art. They even talked about they wanted to play Coastal in a bowl game. I mean, after that game got canceled, all right, let's go play Coastal in a bowl game. So, yeah, I question their motivation here to get margin. They're clearly the better team. They'll win the game, but again, I'm not laying 2 touchdowns.
All right, so the Lending Tree Bowl. This one in Mobile, Alabama, Western Kentucky, Georgia State. 3.5, pretty much the market-wide number. Totals come down a little bit here, 52.5 to 50.5. There are some -4s out there on Georgia State. Look, I mean, we could debate the merits of some of these teams and whether or not they deserve to be in a bowl game. Western Kentucky, of course, a sub-500 team on the season. What do you think here about them in this spot against Georgia State?
Power ratings, I have it 3, and total, I put it 51. And I sent this stuff out on Sunday as soon as the game was announced. So I made it 3 and 51, and you're sitting here at 3.5, 50.5. So I'm not going to have a strong position. I'll probably lean a little with Western Kentucky, even though I think they're a bad team. But they started playing their best ball down the stretch. They won 3 straight. They finally started handing the ball off to their running back Walker. He had his 2 best rushing outputs in the last 2 games, and therefore, Western Kentucky had their 2 best offensive performances in the last 2 games of the season. Georgia State's one of those teams we haven't seen since the end of November. How do they react having a month off? I mean, they're the better team. They deserve to be the favorite. But if you shop real hard and find a 4, another ham sandwich, and I'm not talking honey baked, I'm talking deli ham sandwich on Western Kentucky. That would be my only pre-flop position.
Man, don't talk shit about deli ham sandwiches. I got one waiting for me here after the show because that's going to be my lunch today. I've got Georgia State -6 here, so I do have a little bit of an overlay. I do like the Panthers a little bit. I've been pretty high on this team. We talked about them in the middle of the season that, I wondered how things would go for them offensively, losing Ellington, who was such a big part of their offense last year. And Cornelius Brown's played pretty damn well. I think Sean Elliott's maybe just a very good head coach. And, he was even being talked about a little bit for that South Carolina job to go back after being, I believe, the offensive line coach at South Carolina a couple of years ago. I think they're a very well-coached team. For Western Kentucky, here's what I wonder about. And we talked about this, I think, a little bit on yesterday's show, is that their offense dramatically changes next year. With the hiring of the offensive coordinator from Houston Baptist, I can't think of his name right now, but their offense dramatically changes next year. So I always wonder about sort of the focus level and the motivation for teams that go into a bowl season knowing that things will be very different next year. Now, while they'll still have the same head coach, a lot's still going to change. They may have to change defensive schemes because of what they're going to try to do on offense and all of that. So that's what I worry about with the Hilltoppers here. I just sort of wonder, if they're invested, if they're engaged. On the other hand, as you mentioned with Georgia State, they haven't played in a month. Have they been able to stay sharp? Have they been focused? Did they even think at 5-4 out of the Sun Belt that they would go to a bowl game? Maybe not. So I don't think I'm going to have any play pre-flop on this game, but knowing that I like Georgia State before the game, depending on how things look Saturday for this one, I'd be more inclined to fire on Georgia State pretty early in this one if they look like they're, pretty crisp.
I'll tell you, diving into the bowl game, check this out. I couldn't believe this. Pegram for Western Kentucky hasn't thrown an interception all year.
Wow.
Did you know that?
Did not know
Like, I
that.
had no idea. I mean, he stinks. He's only completing like 58% of his passes. Pure, probably blind luck, not throwing an interception all year.
Well, at least he's completed 0% of his passes to the other team. That's good.
Yeah,
So,
fair
yeah,
enough.
interesting
I
one.
get it's a tough. I mean, I'm telling you, tough. In a year like this, when you got question marks on both teams. I mean, for Pete's sake, it's Western Kentucky and Georgia State. Now, look, I'm a big guy in as many bowl games as possible, so I can more betting opportunities. I just, kudos to you if you find a really good pre-flop position on this one, and we barely have seen hardly any movement. So I think the number's about right.
Well, the other bowl game that was supposed to be scheduled for Saturday, the Gasparilla Bowl, got canceled between South Carolina and UAB. Shame that UAB won't play in a bowl game this year unless there's
Yep.
some weird circumstance that adds a bowl game at some point. But a shame for the Blazers, who definitely deserved to have at least one more game here. We move on to Tuesday, and we move to some higher profile teams in the Cheez-It Bowl. Oklahoma State and Miami. This one also in Orlando at Camping World Stadium. Oklahoma State 2-point favorite in this game, total 58.5. We've seen a little bit of movement, but this one's pretty much settled back in at that -2 number that was pretty much the widely available opener.
Yeah, you know what? It bounced up to 3, and I took Miami at +3, so I'm comfortable with that bet. It wasn't a big bet for me. It was just taking a position on a key number. Miami's had a couple of key players, a couple of defensive ends opt out. That's a concern there. I just I don't mind backing Miami after an absolute embarrassing loss against North Carolina their last time out, and obviously Oklahoma State. My anticipation was a couple of their key offensive playmakers might opt out. So. Again, we're doing this on Wednesday. We're 6 days out. A lot of things, a lot of moving and shaking probably to go along with this one. But right now, I'm leaning towards the Hurricanes.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me. I mean, Oklahoma State wants to run the football because, as we've talked about all season long, their quarterback play is terrible. And evidently, you can run the ball on Miami because North Carolina sure as hell did for 550 yards. Now, Oklahoma State's offense is not North Carolina's offense. That's not really what I'm saying. What I'm saying here is that it wouldn't be shocking if Oklahoma State runs the rock well enough to play keep away, still get chunks of yardage on the ground. And that's why, to me, I'd kind of look under in this game. And, Oklahoma State's defense has been kind of all over the place a little bit. But with the line and the fact that you have two different schools of thought here. If you like Oklahoma State, you think they can run the ball, play keep away, win the game that way. If you like Miami, well, that means they're probably going to stop the run, which means they can play keep away. So to me, I think that's kind of the game plan for really both of these teams here. And I know that, Miami's defense is not good, and their most recent data point was absolutely god awful. But to me, I just sort of look at this one and kind of expect both of these teams to be sort of vanilla in a lot of ways. And that leads me towards looking at the under.
I kind of disagree with you, but I haven't dived in enough to
disagreements
think about that.
are good. Disagreements are good. We don't have enough of them between you and I. Well, and the ones that we do, I always win. So
both guys can run some tempo. I guess that maybe it's squaring me because the everlasting thing in my mind is that Miami North Carolina game. So maybe I'm being a little square, thinking, man, I'm not sure I want to bet under 58.5 in a Miami game at this point when they like to run a lot of tempo with Lashley and two of their best defensive guys are out. That gives me some pause. We'll just put it that way.
No, that's fair. I look at Oklahoma State 7-3 to the under. In
you
think the Big 12.
Yeah, you think Oklahoma State high flying, maybe there's that perception. Reality is this is probably one of the best defenses that Mike Gundy's had there. So, I understand that. So.
And of course, as we get closer to the game too, we'll have to see what the weather looks like where, maybe there's some rain, maybe there's some wind, something like that. It is kind of tough to project these totals so far in advance where, it's December. Weather could play a significant impact in a lot of these different games. How about Colorado and Texas here in the Alamo Bowl? Texas back in the Alamo Bowl for the second straight year. This was one-sided Colorado money for most of the week, but now we're starting to see some indications of maybe a little bit of Texas money as this one's gone back up at some places from 9 to 9.5, really anywhere from 8.5 to 9.5 in the global markets. Total 63.5 for this one. And look, everybody knows that you want to take Tom Herman as an underdog as much as possible, but he's laying almost double digits in this one.
Yeah, that's going to give me pause. Texas had multiple opt-outs, but they had that prior to the Kansas State game, and they go out and just absolutely hammer Kansas State in the season finale. So we'll see. I mean, Ellinger will play for them at quarterback, and it's probably his last hurrah. We'll see if he decide. I guess technically he can come back next year because this year doesn't count for anybody. But yeah, another one where I got to do a little bit more legwork. Generally speaking, I got a little bit of an overlay now that all the money's come in on Colorado. I was closer to the opener as far as a pure power rating. I don't think the Pac-12 is any good. So yeah, Colorado really impressed me this year, but again, I don't think they're very good. And when they finally ran into a team that was, playing some of their better ball, Utah, you saw what happened in that game. They got run out on their home field. So right now, I mean, I would lean towards Texas -9. I got to see if they got a bunch more opt-outs, but I think they're clearly the superior team.
I think this is one where if you like Texas, you might want to wait a little bit and see how they look, because there was a lot of smoke about Tom Herman possibly being gone throughout, the tail end of the regular season. There was talk about, was Urban Meyer in this Austin hotel room? Did they offer him some big contract? Are they trying to look at somebody else? Are they maybe looking at somebody like a Luke Fickell? All of that. And we sort of wondered, how will that impact Texas late in the regular season, including those opt-outs that you mentioned? And they wound up having one of their best performances of the year. You wonder here, though, are they fully engaged? Are they fully invested to play a marginal Pac-12 team, to not leave the state, play the Alamo Bowl, all of that?
Again,
whereas I think Colorado is interested because it is the first year with Carl Durrell. They've exceeded expectations, albeit in just 5 of their games. That's what I want to know. I think Texas, clearly is the better team, has a chance at a blowout victory here, but I got to see if they want to be there first. So I think that's a quintessential live betting game, much like, really a lot of them that we've talked about here.
Totally agree. Couldn't agree. It'll be apparent early on if Texas is ready to play or not. If they show up, this is a cheap number. If not, LA can get beat. That's what I'm saying. I'll say the one nugget here that I'll say, if you're, don't be messing around with money lines as far as favorites go. I mean, if you like the favorite, don't be afraid to lay the point spread. We've already seen that so far. It's not just this bowl season. It's been the last couple of years. I mean, if you like the favorite, forget the money line. They're going to easily, cover the spread. The spread really isn't going to factor it in. Similar with the dog. I mean, if you're looking to bet the dog, of course, try to get the best number you can. But other than that, don't be afraid in these bowl games because they're so high variance. I'd be certainly, if you're betting some underdogs, you're doing yourself a disservice by not sprinkling in a little bit on the money line, because a lot of times if the dog's the right side, they're just going to, forget it. They're going to win the game outright.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things you kind of look at that 80-20 split, 80 on the spread, 20 on the money line, 85-15, something like that. Whatever you feel comfortable with, whatever your risk tolerance is. And of course, how much you like that dog and how much you think they actually have a shot to win that game outright. Noon kickoff here on Wednesday. First time with us talking about this bowl game on the show. Wake Forest and Wisconsin in the Duke's Mayo Bowl in Charlotte, North Carolina. This one, of course, used to be the Belk Bowl. Wisconsin's laying a touchdown here. Total 52.5 for this one. I got to say, man, I understand some of the anti-Wake Forest sentiment. And also, we talked about it on the show, their turnover margin throughout the year was exceptional until, of course, the last regular season game that they played. But I saw nothing from Wisconsin over the last really 5 games that they played that would suggest that I can trust them covering a touchdown here.
Yeah, I just haven't downgraded Wisconsin enough in my power ratings. Obviously, they look good at times to start the season, a couple of blowout wins. And then you're right. Down the stretch, they've been in these last 4 games, offensively. What gives you when you've scored a total of 40 points, so you're averaging 10 points per game in your last 4, failing to cover all of them and losing 3 of them outright. I'm not anxious to run to the window and bet the Badgers here, even though my power ratings say that they should be the play here at 9. I also got to look, how healthy is Graham Mertz. He got banged up in the last game against Minnesota, but it's tough getting margin with the team when you can't score. I know that sounds like anybody, a third grader could say that, but that's giving me pause, certainly. But I'm not sure I want to bet Wake. Even though I highly respect Dave Clawson, very familiar with him. He coached at my alma mater, Bowling Green, for several years, so I followed his career. I mean, their whole season down the stretch after a very impressive start been disrupted. I mean, they played one game since the middle of November, so a little worried there. And then look at the game flow. The total's kind of telling you it's going to play closer to Wisconsin style of game than it is Wake Forest.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. And like I said, I mean, look, this is a Wisconsin team. The Big Ten West was a mess. I mean, it was really the Big Ten in general this season was an absolute mess. And for Wake Forest here, I mean, look, you've got a team that really struggles to score in Wisconsin. You have a Wake Forest team that takes great care of the football. I mean, they only had 3 turnovers in their 8 games. How is Wisconsin getting margin in this game? How many points does Wisconsin need to score to cover this number? And to me, I would be much more comfortable taking the under if I think Wisconsin has a chance to cover the spread. But, again, I mean, how does Wake Forest do against that Wisconsin defense? Does Wake Forest wind up having some turnover issues of their own? Do they have some takeaways? That's another question here. They had 16 takeaways in their 8 games, and Wisconsin did not take good care of the football at all whatsoever, especially during that 4-game stretch at the end of the year. So, man, I don't know. Like, something about this line feels really fishy to me. I have it 6.5. I did make a big adjustment to Wisconsin at the tail end of the year, so that's probably why I'm more in line with the number than you are. But that's the question for me, man. I just look at this game and I go, does Wisconsin have to hold Wake Forest to 14 or 17 points to cover this number? I mean, can they do it? Sure. Do I expect them to do it? I don't think so. Not if they're unable to force turnovers.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm anxious to see if anyone opts out and what the overall vibe is leading up to the game now, a week out. And it'll be interesting to see. I trust Wake Forest probably a little bit more than Wisconsin. Keeping also on the injury report, there was a couple of key guys in Wake Forest that were Boogie Basham, their outstanding defensive lineman, was kind of iffy towards the end of the season. It's just Wake Forest, I haven't seen them in forever. I mean, really last time they were really a part of my thought process on a week in and week out basis was that North Carolina topsy-turvy game. So that's my only hang up on Wake. I just haven't seen them that much.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's definitely a fair point to make. Again, it's one of those games. I also want to see where the number goes. I mean, is 7 going to work here on this game? Will it be influenced by who's in and who's out? Or will there be some sort of position that actually comes in on this game? I don't really know, but I'm kind of curious to see what happens with that, where I think it's a good game to talk about and it creates a lot of good content. But from a betting standpoint, maybe not the best of games to play here in this bowl season. What about Missouri and Iowa here? This is the Music City Bowl, of course, in Nashville, Tennessee. You got Iowa laying 14.5 or 15 here, total of 50. That's a big spread with a lowish total.
Yeah, I lean Missouri, although I am worried what's their status on much of their players. I mean, they had a converted quarterback that was their starter at the start of the season, Robinson, the TCU transfer. He's playing the defensive backfield in the Mississippi State game. That's how bad they were. They were down to legitimately like 50 guys on their roster. And there's a big reason why, their defense all of a sudden got really bad. They're down the stretch. And maybe that might be worth a little bit of a look there. I know a lot of people want to bet Iowa unders, but Missouri was so inept defensively down the stretch that it's awfully tough for me to recommend betting, an under there. But then again, I don't want to lay more than 2 touchdowns with Iowa. I mean, as dominant as they've been since the start of the season after that 0-2 start, they're not a team that I'm really anxious to lay that kind of number. They've only laid it twice this season. They didn't cover double digits against Nebraska, and they really had to score a bunch of points late to cover a 13.5 number at Illinois. I mean, that shows you. At Illinois, Iowa was a 13.5 point favorite. Now at a quote-unquote neutral site game against Missouri, a team that I think is clearly better than Illinois, they're laying 15. My overlay is a couple points in favor of Missouri here.
Yeah, this is one, again, it's a really difficult thing to, try and take a team like Iowa in this type of role. I mean, I think it's a very challenging thing to do. And the question is, is Missouri that bad? Was it just sort of something that kind of, everything just kind of fell apart at the same time? As you mentioned, defensively, they were running all over the place. Gave up 48 to Arkansas, 49 to Georgia,
Yep.
51 to Mississippi State. Iowa's not, SEC caliber on offense by any means, but, can Missouri keep up? If Iowa's defense shows up, can Missouri keep up? By the way, Iowa, since the start of the 2015 season, 16-13 against the spread, laying double digits. So 55.2% over
That's
29 games. That's not bad, but I don't think it's anything that I would, base my handicap on, at least as far as this game goes. All right, marquee game here Wednesday, Florida and Oklahoma. This one is the Cotton Bowl Classic in Arlington, Texas. So Oklahoma with some familiarity with that venue, of course. I don't know if that necessarily matters. We'll see what attendance capacity looks like. That should benefit Oklahoma, assuming that, there's a decent amount of people there. But Florida's still the favorite, 2.5 with juice or 3 reduced, total up to 72 for this one.
Yeah, I like Oklahoma. And I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not giving Oklahoma at least a half point as far as familiarity. It is Jerry's world. I mean, you got the big screen. I've seen a lot of teams kind of be in awe of that, one of the best stadiums in the entire world, regardless of sport. So the fact that Oklahoma plays there consistently, they just played their last game there. Yeah, I think it's worth a half a point, and I did factor that in my power ratings. And speaking of that, I got this one close to pick 'em, especially with Florida with being without Kyle Pitts. I mean, he's just a matchup nightmare. You take him out of the lineup. They still got Kadarius Toney and a lot of other weapons, but they're not the same offense when he's not in the lineup. So, and I think Oklahoma defensively is not getting enough credit for their turnaround since the start of the season. And I'll say another thing. If it's not for one quarter of bad football for Oklahoma, this team, believe it or not, Oklahoma would be in the playoff right now. And that bad quarter was all the way back in September the 26th when they had a really bad fourth quarter and blew a 3-touchdown lead against Kansas State. If that doesn't happen, then there were some fluky turnovers going and a block punt. If they win that game, Oklahoma would have been in the college football playoff as the Big 12 champ. With their only loss, they avenge it being against Iowa State. So I think the market's not fully grasping that. I get it. It's tough fading an SEC team because that conference is, great and the almighty and whatnot. But I think Oklahoma obviously wins the game if I'm going to bet them +3.
Yeah, I think Oklahoma's the right side here too. And we talk about this a lot in a more traditional season. We talk about it in the college basketball arena as well. When an FBS team loses to an FCS team or loses to some bad FBS team that they shouldn't lose to, that team kind of gets discarded. They kind of get thrown away. In college basketball, you lose to a lower division team or get upset by a low major team, something like that. Everybody throws you away. It's the only thing that people remember. It's amazing how in so many other cases, it's a what have you done for me lately business, unless you lose a game you absolutely should not have. And that's what happened to Oklahoma as a 28-point favorite against Kansas State. And furthermore, that loss looked worse and worse and worse as the season went along because Kansas State just fell off the face of the earth. Everybody has continued to punish Oklahoma for that Kansas State loss. They've been underpriced in the market. They've covered 6 of 7. The one they didn't was that weird game against Baylor where neither team really did much of anything offensively. This is a very good Oklahoma team. I have Oklahoma -2 in this game. I think I have a pretty accurate representation of where Oklahoma should be. I think the market is trailing behind a little bit on the Sooners. Now, I could wind up with egg on my face from that statement, but for Florida here, look, we know they can't defend, so that's an obvious point here. And Oklahoma's defense did get good over the course of the season. And the second thing is, they don't want to be in this game. Okay, they're playing a marquee opponent in Oklahoma. They're also playing a quasi home game for the Sooners. They wanted to beat Alabama last week and then kind of see what happened from there. They were in the game. They played as well as they possibly could. They didn't get it. And that's back-to-back losses for Florida. And now I just wonder, especially with some of the other external things happening with the program with, some questions about Dan Mullen and all of that. I just think Oklahoma, look, if I'm Lincoln Riley, I say, look, boys, we're not in the college football playoff, but we can play the second best team in the SEC and we can beat them. I think Oklahoma wins this game. I think they're more motivated, more focused, more engaged. And I think when this one is done, people are going to look back and say, and I should have had Oklahoma held in higher regard.
You can't agree with anybody more than that. So, yeah, the distractions that are going around the Florida program right now aren't good. And let's just go 2 weeks ago. I mean, just literally 2 weeks ago, Florida thought they were a playoff team. That was the sentiment and that vibe in that football building was, hey, we're going to be a playoff or at least be right there in the mix. They thought to themselves, and kudos to them, they did compete with Alabama, but they were thinking much bigger things than playing little old Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl. I can tell you that. And to lose to LSU and then turn around and get that big, uplifting performance against Alabama, and then to still come up short there, I think it's kind of a deflator for them. So, yeah, I think again, Oklahoma is one of my top plays of the entire bowl season.
We'll talk more in detail about the other 12 games that are left for the Bulls on next week's show, but just as sort of an overview and kind of a look ahead here, are there any games that, are kind of on your radar out of those 12 that we didn't talk about that start December 31st and run through January 2nd?
I did bet San Jose State. I just think the Mountain West, I mean, Nevada kind of proved that by beating, I thought, a solid Tulane team. I think Mountain West is a much better conference than the MAC. And I think Ball State's kind of a phony team, even though I bet a lot of Ball State this year. In fact, I just bet them in the MAC championship game. I just think the disparity between those two programs is bigger than it was 7.5. Now it's 8.5. So I actually think the line's going to go to 10. And I just think now that Brett Brennan's not going off to Arizona, he's likely going to be the head coach. They focus in, they're dialed in, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they pummel Ball State.
Any other ones?
I want to see how much negativity Georgia gets because they're probably going to have some opt-outs. Remember last year, the whole market was against them in the Sugar Bowl game. They closed as like a 4-point favorite over Baylor, and everyone was talking about all the opt-outs for Georgia. The reality is it's still, very talented roster, and I know Cincy will have a chip on their shoulder, but man, I think Georgia's a different team with JT Daniels at quarterback, and I'm laying in wait to see if I can get a 6.5. I'll fire away on the Bulldogs.
Yeah, that's not really a power ratings play for me. Let's say we give Georgia 1.5 or so playing in Atlanta. I mean, they're very accustomed to it, obviously. Then my number is 7 on this game. But from a matchup standpoint, I mean, first of all, Georgia's entire body of work is not indicative of this team as a whole because they had a bunch of dudes out on defense for several weeks in a row, and they made the change to Daniels way late in the year to the point where early on in the season, maybe they beat Florida, if they have Daniels out there. If they have all those defensive guys, all of that, this is a spot to me where nothing against Luke Fickell, nothing against Cincinnati, and Fickell's done a phenomenal job recruiting there in the Queen City. I think this talent disparity shows up in this game. I'm praying for a 6.5 too.
Yeah, and it's not like Georgia just lost the SEC championship game. It's not like they had bigger goals the last month of Sure, they had bigger goals at the start of the season, but the reality set in for them. I mean, well over a month ago when they lost to Florida, they weren't going to the SEC championship at that point. So the fact that they've kind of rebounded and focused and dialed in a little bit here, I'm not as worried about them. Dream crusher. They're not playing in the playoffs and they're playing little old Cincinnati. So I think they'll be somewhat focused here. And I'll say this: a lot of people forget this, but they were beating Alabama with about 5 minutes left on the road in the third quarter of that game. I mean, with what Alabama does in a week in and week out basis, that was a really impressive 40 minutes of football that Georgia had, even with a walk-on Stetson Bennett at quarterback. If I can get that kind of effort out of Georgia here, I think they could blow out Cincinnati.
Yeah, and frankly, I think we do get that effort, especially because, as you said, they're not coming off of that disappointment of losing the conference title game again. This is just, this is their reality this season, and I think that they're more willing to embrace that. Like I said, we'll talk more about the other bowl games on next week's show, but I want to transition over to the NFL side of things here for a few minutes and key in on a few of these games. And it's weird to me that we have a Christmas Day game here on a Friday between Minnesota and New Orleans. Saints -7, 50.5 the total. And as we know, something weird always seems to happen when these two teams get together.
Yeah, it does. I mean, but I guess I don't understand the Minnesota love here. I mean, I can bet 6.5 here in town at multiple shops. So I mean, I'll lay 6.5 with New Orleans. The fact that, the Minnesota's a team that's gotten the best of them in a couple of high profile playoff games, 2 times in the last 3 years. I think that refocuses the Saints a little bit. I mean, they're not going to get the 1 seed now, basically, unless Green Bay collapses in these last 2 games. But I mean, they still want to get a home game. And I think, chalk up last week, Breeze was rusty. Didn't really get it going until very late in the game against the Chiefs. And Minnesota's season's over. I mean, I bet them last week. That's now 5 straight non-covers for them. They're not going to the playoffs. I lean towards the Saints side here, especially at 6.5.
Yeah, last week was the first time I thought we had a buy low sign on Minnesota because everybody fell in love with this team kind of around like late October, early
Yep.
November. So everybody kind of fell in love with this team. They got overpriced in the marketplace. As you mentioned, 5 straight non-covers for them. I thought last week was a buy point. They were laying the same number at home to the Bears that they were laying on the road to the Bears a month earlier. And they never really had a chance in that game. So that said a lot to me about Minnesota. And I mean, I think this line, you could argue it's maybe a little bit light. I think this line's probably, in the right range, but I wouldn't take Minnesota here. I mean, I don't know what the short week necessarily matters or anything like that, but still, it would be New Orleans or nothing for me in that one.
I mean, on Christmas, you're away from. It's been a challenging year. You're away from your family. A short week. Wouldn't you rather be at home and stuff? Give me the Saints. I mean, I always respect the NFL market because it's not college where I know the market because you can say this and get on me because of ego or whatnot, but a lot of instances I feel like I am the market, and as far as I can predict where lines are going and what's going to happen. I obviously have way more respect for the NFL market. I'll plead the fifth in some instances, but this is one where I disagree a little bit, and I don't get the Minnesota love here.
All right, so we go to Saturday here, and this first game, I thought it was interesting early in the week to begin with that Tampa Bay was only a 7.5-point favorite with what the Lions defense did last week against the Titans. And the fact that there's a lot of sentiment out there, a lot of pro Buccaneers sentiment from a lot of people. They look very good from an advanced metrics standpoint and all of that. They had to be excited about this matchup. So the line goes from 7.5 to 9. And I'm thinking, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I agree with that line move. Well, now we find out that the Detroit Lions will have virtually none of their coaching staff in this game, with a team that feels like it's kind of playing out the string for the most part anyway, against a Tampa Bay team that has motivation, has things on the line, needs this game. Now we're up to 10, and the total's sitting at 54.
Yeah, I kind of lean over. I mean, if it's kind of substitute teacher effect. I mean, your coaching staff's not there. I mean, it's kind of like lackadaisical. When you get lackadaisical effort and whatnot, I think that affects more defensively than anything. And speaking of that, I mean, the offense will be fine because you got your quarterback on the field and Stafford, hopefully. And they've been okay the last 4 weeks as defense along 37 points per game. So I'm going to go with the over here.
All right, fair enough. It's pretty easy handicap there. Anything else on Saturday's 2 games? San Francisco, Arizona, with the Cardinals laying 5 and 48.5, or Miami laying 3 at Vegas and 47.5?
I just find it interesting. I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago, but I remember specifically in the season opener betting Arizona +7 against San Francisco, and they win the game out right now. Over the course of a season, the two teams, change a power rating, 12 points. Seems like a lot, but I haven't seen anything from San Francisco the last few weeks to say that I can bet them confidently. Same thing I could say for Las Vegas here. I'll probably lean on the over in the Miami-Las Vegas game, but other than that, not much.
All right, so we go to Sunday here, and the first game on the board, Denver and the Chargers. This is one that's kind of perplexed me. I've been trying to, I got a lot of stuff going on here, but, I've been trying to figure out what to do with my 5 picks for the Circa this week. I think I'm 2.5 or 3 points out of the money now, so it's just sort of playing for pride at this point. But this is a game that I don't feel like I have any kind of read on, with the Chargers laying 3 in extra juice and 49 the total.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, I probably lean Denver, but I mean, I took them last week against the Bills and came out strong on this very show, and obviously got my teeth kicked down my throat. So I'm a little woozy from that one as far as recommending Denver. But I can't lay points with Anthony Lynn, who, I mean, obviously everyone knows now is probably the worst coach in the NFL. I mean, as a home favorite, they've covered 1 of the last 10 times. And again, I just, if 3.5, Denver becomes, more than a ham sandwich type of bet.
You and ham sandwiches, man. Do you have a craving for ham sandwiches every time you do the
It's
show?
Christmas ham. I mean, I don't know. I know that's kind of weak, but
Uh,
don't you think of ham at Christmas time?
of
I do.
course. Yeah, of course. Who doesn't? I mean, ham is kind of the preferred thing, I would say. I don't
Yeah.
know. All right, so here's an interesting one because we have to go all the way back to 1995 for a spot where the Browns have been laying more than a touchdown on the road, and they will do it this week in their second straight game at MetLife Stadium against the New York Jets. 9.5 is mostly the number. There are some tens out there in the marketplace as well. 47.5 or 48 the total. We talk all the time about you and historical outliers and the fact that you generally don't really want to play on them. What about this one though?
I still lean Cleveland. And I think it is their large. If it goes to 10, it's their largest one in at least 30 years, right? I mean, I went back to 1989. I couldn't find anything bigger than anything that was at 10. So, yeah, usually I fade that. But here's one thing: I did a little extra homework, a little legwork, because obviously you want to talk about historical outliers. The Jets just had one last week, winning outright as a 17-point dog. And I looked up, how did teams do coming off an outright upset as a 14-point or more underdog the next week after pulling a huge upset, 14 or more? That's the Jets here. 0-9-1 against the spread last 10 times. That's going back to 95. Haven't covered a single time since 95 after pulling a huge upset. And we got 2 of them this week. So, yeah, I'll lean Cleveland with everything to play for. And the Jets, removing the O, they're not going to be winless, even though they probably should have been if they wanted to get Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. I'll lean with the Browns and more to play for.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned a lot on this show that the Browns are a team I want to play as a dog. They're not really a team that I want to lay points with. But in this spot, with their offensive efficiency and they've been excellent since Odell Beckham Jr. went out. They've been phenomenal on the offensive side of the football. Defensively, it remains a work in progress, but Denzel Ward came back last week. Harrison's coming back this week. Those are 2 really big upgrades for them in the secondary. I don't think the Jets can really attack them in too many ways. Seeing this total go up suggests to me that the Browns offense is getting held in very high esteem out there in the marketplace right now. And maybe people are selling the Browns defense a little bit, but I don't think the Jets can keep up drive for drive, score for score at all whatsoever with Cleveland. So, and Cleveland too, they've been an excellent fourth quarter team with the lead. They run the football with Chubb and Hunt. They play keep away for most of the fourth quarter. You worry a little bit less about the backdoor situation with something like that. The only concern I would have about Cleveland, though, that game against Pittsburgh next week could mean absolutely everything to them, with potentially the division on the line if Pittsburgh loses here this week against Indianapolis. So that's my only worry. If the Browns are up 17 or something like that at halftime, do they relax a little bit? I think it's a possibility. We saw it in that Titans game when they had the big Ravens game coming up after that. That's my biggest concern here for the Browns. But I think Browns' first half is an excellent look here.
I can agree with that derivative bet. Absolutely.
All right, so looking through the rest of the NFL card here, I guess we could talk Indianapolis and Pittsburgh, and then we'll just kind of jump around with anything else that you like. Indy now a road favorite at Pittsburgh, and this was something you told me about before the show when we were discussing which NFL games we want to talk about. Is this too much of an adjustment from where we thought this line was going to be?
I think so. I mean, look at line was Pittsburgh 3 and Indy. It's real easy. Indy basically met expectation last week. They're favored by 7, won by 7. So that's easy. I know Pittsburgh's not only looked horrific against the Bengals. I mean, obviously it's been 3 straight tough games for them, but I know Indy's been given, I don't think people realize this. Indianapolis has been favored in every single game but one this year. I mean, the market loves the Colts, that game being at Cleveland where they lost. I'll trust, and maybe Big Ben, it's over for him, but I'll trust them to circle the wagons, rally the troops. I'll lean Pittsburgh.
That is definitely a very contrarian look there. What do
you think?
What do you think happens with that number?
Probably only goes up, I would think. So I'm not running to the window to bet Indy right now. And I mean, Pinnacle, last I looked at what was sitting maybe at 2. So yeah, I could see it going up.
All right, so what else are you looking at here on this NFL card for this week? I mean, we've reached that point in the year where we're getting just a lot of big favorites. Obviously you've got New Orleans laying a touchdown, Tampa Bay is laying doubles, the Browns are essentially laying doubles, Baltimore is laying doubles, Kansas City, same thing. Buffalo's a touchdown favorite over New England on the road, which, I mean, that never happens. Anything else? Chicago's a huge favorite over Jacksonville on the road. Anything else you're looking at this week?
I kind of like Carolina against Washington. I know Washington needs it to remain, ahead of the division. But I just think with all the turmoil going on with that, especially obviously if Haskins plays, I love my bet in that one. But not so much if Alex Smith is able to come back. It looks like he could. Carolina's been remarkably consistent. I know they stink, and I know Rivera's going to want to beat his former team. But I mean, Carolina's 8-1 against the spread as an underdog the last 9 times. They played. They haven't given up on the season. I'll tell you that. They played Green Bay really hard last week. Outgained the Packers on the road there. So I do like Carolina there, and I also like the Rams. I just think they're better than Seattle. The market kind of agrees with that with some money coming in on the Rams here. I think they're a bad matchup for Seattle. If you look at, how do you defend Russell Wilson? You get that pressure up the middle on the defensive front. And obviously the Rams are really good on the interior defensive line. I think that's one of the major reasons why they've beaten Seattle 5 of the last 6 times. So I do like the Rams to rebound from that horrific loss to the Jets last week and beat Seattle.
Always great to chat here on today's show with professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com. And Brad, what's happening over at the website right now, bud?
Yeah, it's my newsletter. I talk about it each week, but I do have a special, and it's this. It's $69. And you're thinking, what, $69? Are you kidding me, for the rest of this season? Yeah, it's for the rest of this season and all of next season. That's right. Basically, obviously you get all the bowl games that I got. You get the last couple weeks of the NFL. You get all the NFL playoffs, and you get all of the 2021 football season. So you're good through next year's Super Bowl. For $69, you go to bradpowersports.com. It's my newsletter. It gets sent to you via email each and every week during the season, monthly during the off season. Check it out. Download past issues for free. And again, $69 for the rest of this year and all of next season. A little Christmas special for this week.
Yeah, very nice price there over at bradpowersports.com. And Brad, always a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for joining me. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to you and yours, bud. And we'll talk to you again next week.
All right. Sounds good. Take care, my friend.
There you go. There's Brad Powers, professional bettor and handicapper from bradpowersports.com. And make sure you follow him on Twitter at Brad Powers and the number 7. Don't know if I'll record it tonight or quickly in the morning, but I will give you my thoughts for week 16 in the Circus Sports Million. 42, 32, and 1 on the year. Looks like I'm not going to finish in the money unless I go 9-1 or 10-0 here over the last 2 weeks. That will be the goal. That will be the hope. And I'll tell you about the games that I'm looking at here for week 16. And what will probably be, as I mentioned, a shortened edition of ATS Radio here to round out the week. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. If you don't listen to tomorrow's show, Merry Christmas to you and yours. Happy holidays, whatever you celebrate. Do it safely, do it smartly, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.